Jamuted. Debated. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. So if y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Alrighty, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. So, couple of things that we want to talk about. First of all, so thank you very much. The hype train is close. Oh no. Okay, let's go quick. So this Saturday, we're hosting a bunch of fun events on Discord. So this is the consequences of the Swap It Challenge. So we hit awesome community milestones through the Swap It Challenge. So we're going to be actually having one of our reward milestones this Saturday. So at 6 p.m. UTC, we've got a draw together with people with a drawing prompt. 7 p.m. UTC, we have an in-house gaming night. We're going to be playing Valorant, CSGO, Overwatch, Dota, chess with other members of the HG community. And at 9 p.m. UTC, we've got a talent show. So showcase your talents over Discord, sing, play music, perform stand-up, whatever y'all want to do. So that'll be a milestone that we're going to be doing. So if y'all are, free on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 6 p.m. UTC, then show up on Discord, and we've just got a bunch of stuff planned. I see we've got a hype train running. So I just wanted to thank all of y'all for all the support that we've been given so far. So because y'all are so kind and will sub and donate and things like that, we've actually been able to put those resources towards making different kinds of resources on the platform, things like that. It allows us to stream. It also allows us to do things like first session on us. So we've got a program that's running right now where your first session of coaching, if you're trying to figure out how to be more confident in life or what direction you should go in, all these kinds of things. The first session is on us right now, and we just want to express a lot of gratitude to everyone who supported the work that we've been doing, because we wouldn't be able to do that for our community without your support. So if y'all are, first of all, thank you to everyone else who's supported so far. And because of that support, coaching is now more accessible than it's ever been. If you're kind of curious about it, not sure if it's going to work for you or not, you're welcome to kind of try it out. And the first session is on us. Just a reminder that what we tend to see from a data standpoint, and this is, we've had over 10,000 clients on the platform, is that we tend to see optimal results around 12 weeks. So a lot of, just like anything else in life, you can start dieting today, but if you stick with it for 3 months, you're going to start to see changes in terms of your health. The same thing goes with exercise. Same thing goes with coaching, which is almost like personal training for your mind, right? How do I understand my thoughts? How do I understand my desires? How do I understand how to overcome internal things within myself to accomplish what I want to? One of the things that we really emphasize is the why. So we recently saw, it was an awesome post by someone in our community who shared a scientific study that showed that porn addiction is correlated with feeling purposelessness in life. So when we feel meaningless in life, we tend to slip into all of these dopaminergic addictions, right? We doom scroll, we spend time on Reddit, we do all this crap. And so what the interesting thing there is that the more that we develop a sense of purpose, we have a why. Once we have a why, like, why should I get up? I don't feel like getting up in the morning. Why should I get up in the morning? And once you have a really good answer to that question, because what gets people up in the morning? You got to have a reason to get up. And so what we're losing sight of is our reason to get up in the morning. Because like now society is telling us all kinds of things, right? Social media is like, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. But here's the thing. Things that you should do are by definition things that you don't do because you say you should do them. The only things that I should do are the things that I haven't done. And so if you kind of think about that for a second, it's kind of weird because that by definition makes should things the hardest things to do. And we try to motivate ourselves with shoulds. I should get up every day. I should exercise every day. I should start doing this. I should meditate every day. Should. But it doesn't lead to motivation. So you got to have a why, a good reason. And society telling you that it's going to improve your life isn't enough. Discovering that internal motivation is really what we focus on in coaching. So thank you very much for everyone who's supported the stream so far, everyone who's subbed, donated, whatever. That's what allows us to do first session on us. Thank you. Okay, let's dive in. So last time I went on a slight rant, for which I apologize. Not it's okay to go on a rant, but let me put it this way. We've got work left to do. So we've had a couple of really awesome I don't know, like posts in the community recently. And so I just wanted to talk about those because I think that they really do a good job of representing a lot of the challenges that we face in the community. So like what people like really struggle with. And I think they do a good job of illustrating that. So let's take a look. Let me do this first. Okay. So let's take a look. Up. Okay. The 25-year-old loner always wonders how their life could have turned out differently. Most people they like seem to just disappear eventually. People often ask why they are so quiet. Has friends but doesn't feel fully a part of the group. Constant mental health and self-esteem issues, no best friend since primary school, never had a girlfriend, has finally given up their optimism. In this example, it's a man, but we've seen this in women as well, and homosexuals and bisexuals and stuff like that, right? So you can be a woman and never had a boyfriend. Can always sense most people don't really want to be talking to them when they are. Always feels out of place. Hobby/skill worked. They worked hard at, but just not good enough to be a professional. Doesn't really care where their life is going anymore. Always feels out of place. Seems normal to other people, but always feels alone inside. And secret lifelong pornography addiction. The 25-year-old loner. So when we look at this, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that an increasing amount of our society identifies with this. We have 25-year-old loners at a scale and pace that we've never had before. So we see this, there are even like culturally specific terms for this and even very extreme versions, right? So like in China, there's a movement called laying flat, which is not exactly the same as this. In a lot of Latin America or Spain, they're called ninis, so ni trabajo ni estudiar. We call them NEETs also, not employment, education, or training. In Japan, they're probably the first ones that coined the term hikikomori, shut-ins, right? So we know that there's something going on. I recently read a paper from the field of economics about how young people entering the workforce, especially men, is at a historic all-time low. And so even in psychiatry, we call this failure to launch. So that's like a term that we'll kind of use. So here's the pattern of someone who fails to launch. So what'll happen is you'll have someone who grows up and does pretty good, like in primary school, middle school. They don't fail out. They have some friends. They get invited to birthday parties. They pass their classes. They kind of do okay. But then what happens is the later they go in life, the more the gap increases between them and other people. But there's not like a traumatic event, right? Because in society, like we're okay with that. We sort of are okay if like, oh, if you struggle in life and something bad happened to you, then it's not your fault. But what happens is there's an increasingly large a proportion of people who don't have anything to blame, really, except for themselves, right? It's not like I was horribly abused. It's not like I had some terrible accident. Just every year that goes by, I just kind of slip a little bit further and further behind. And you kind of fail to launch. You start out on the runway, you start getting some momentum, you're kind of speeding up, your front landing gear starts to lift, and then for some reason your plane just never takes off. You had all the momentum just like everyone else. If you look at yourself when you were 16, you had so many possibilities, but you just don't get the plane off the ground. Maybe you even finished college. And so what starts to happen is all of those things that you had kind of had as you were a child, over time, they start to slough off. You had a best friend. They went to college. You went to a different college. You all started to drift apart. They made new friends. For some reason, you didn't. And so as they made new friends and started to live their lives and started to date, they had less and less time for you. And you somehow weren't able to do that. And so they move off in one direction and they kind of leave you behind. But when people look at you, there's nothing like grossly disfiguring, right? It's not like you smell bad. It's not like you have bad hygiene. It's not like, you seem okay on the outside, but internally you're lonely, you're isolated, and every year that goes by, it gets a little bit worse. So you had all the momentum, you just didn't launch. And so what we tend to think about ourselves in this situation, and what other people will eventually start to think of us, and even what we start to suspect or see is that other people start to think of us this way, is this term loser. The loner gets replaced by a loser. I'm a loser, right? We've had that term for a long time. And when someone kind of crosses into a loser, then it is their fault, right? Because this guy's a loser, like they just don't do anything for themselves. And so if we want to get out of this situation, we're going to do what we normally do here. First of all, understand what on earth is going on. This is a systemic issue, right? So I don't think it's fair to blame just the individual. If it was just you, there would be no term like a NEET, a NIHI, NINI, hikokomori. We literally have all over the world culturally specific terms. People are recognizing this phenomenon and assigning words in their own language to describe this. So it's not just you, it's a systemic issue. So first of all, we have to understand what the systemic issue is. Why is that? It's because if we want to fix it, here's the crux of the problem. If you're a 25-year-old loner, you think it's your fault. So you accept responsibility not only for your own actions, but everything on the systemic side too, because you don't think that it's systemic, right? Because it's clearly you, because other people are out there and they're doing fine, so it can't be a systemic issue. Then you start accepting responsibility for things that you have no control over. You have some control over your personal actions, but you don't control what society does. But we don't even acknowledge that society is influencing this. So then you end up taking responsibility for all of it, but you can't actually control it. So once I start taking responsibility for things that are out of my control, all I can do is lose. And so that feeds the cycle. So we first of all have to understand what's going on from a societal perspective. Once we understand what's going on from a societal perspective, then we'll understand what we're actually responsible for. Once we understand what we're responsible for, then we can devote all of our energy to it. We'll talk a little bit about why that can be challenging or hard, and then ultimately we'll see a path forward. If I specialize in one thing, it's helping 25-year-old loners. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the first thing that I kind of noticed as I was training to become a psychiatrist is I would gravitate sometimes towards these people, or these people would gravitate towards me. Maybe it's because I too was a 25-year-old loser. When I was 25 years old, I had graduated from college after 5 years with a 2.4 GPA, right? I rounded up to 2.5 because it was 2.47 or something like that. Didn't really have any money, was applying to medical school for the second time, right? So I just failed to get in for 1 year and was applying my second year, failed to get in that year as well. And so who am I at that point? I've got nothing going for me. And so as I started working with these people in my office, I started to notice a couple of things. The first is when they came in, I thought, even in my head, I thought, wow, this guy's like a real loser, like me. We're both losers. But as I learned more about psychiatry, I started to realize, oh my God, this person is actually not a loser. What's actually, as I talked to them about their experience of life, I started to notice all kinds of subtle differences that we take for granted. So I'll give you all a simple example. And these are the kinds of questions that you should ask yourself. Because the 25-year-old loner sheds relationships, right? Over time, it's not like they drive people away. They don't rupture things. They don't cause problems. They're not drama kings or queens. Just over time, people start to slough off. And why is that? What's going on? And what I started to realize is there are all kinds of things which these people were never taught. So for example, I want you all to think about this, okay? When you were growing up, when you were 7 years old, how did you learn the rules of making friends? Did your parents make sure you got invited to birthday parties? When you had a birthday party, did your parents invite kids over? When you went to a birthday party, did your parents pick out a gift for the person that you were Did they do all the work? Did they pick out the gift and they wrote the card and just handed it to the other parent? Or were you involved in that process? Were you taught, okay, let's go get a gift for someone. When we get a gift for someone, let's write a card. I'm going to hand you the present and the card, and you're going to go in, and I realize you're going to feel a little bit awkward. You're going to go to your friend, and you're going to hand it to them. Or did they take care of everything? Or did you not even get invited? Or did you not even go? Or did you go with a gift but no card? Or did you go with a card or no gift? Another wild thing, when you had a birthday party and other kids showed up, did you give them return gifts? Did you go up to each and every one of your guests at the party, give them a little goodie bag and say, thank you for coming? Did your parents make you do that? Because this is how you form relationships. This is how you maintain relationships. There are all kinds of things. Did your parents enroll you in particular things? When you had conflict, I remember when I was in the 5th grade, I got into a fight with a kid in my school because we were all part of a friend circle and there were 4 of us. And we started getting into conflict because I wanted to hang out with 2 people. I didn't want to hang out with this 4th kid. The 4th kid wanted to hang out with the 2 people who didn't want to hang out with me. I got a phone call from his mom to my house. And she talked to me a little bit about how it's not good to fight over friends. And like, is it kind of cringe? Absolutely. Was the kid embarrassed? I imagine so. Did I kind of get reprimanded by some other kid's parents? Sure. Were my parents even aware of what was going on? Absolutely not. But the next day at school, there was civility between the 2 of us. And we ended up doing fine for the rest of the year. A parent actually interceded on behalf of their child. How did the parent even know that? It's because they must have talked to their kid. They must have said, hey, what's going on with you today? I'm having trouble making friends. And the parent is like, oh, let me do what a parent is supposed to do. If my child is having trouble learning how to walk, I will teach them to walk. If they're having trouble making friends, let me teach them how to make friends. But what a lot of parents do, and we'll get to why this isn't really their fault in a second, is they don't teach their kids, right? They just sort of send their kids off and assume that the child will learn. Because this is not like, it's not like parenting 101, right? Like not all parents do this. And the thing is that used to work. What's changed? One thing, the internet. The internet has changed. So it used to be that we did not have social alternatives or socially fracturing forces like we have today. So there's an increase in globalization and you can work remotely and people will move from one place to another. 100 years ago, I remember talking to my grandmother about like when she grew up in her village, what was it like for her? And it's hard to describe this, but like I can't really do it justice, but she was explaining to me that the world was a fictional concept. The idea of other nations were like theoretical. No one in her village of 200 people, not a single person in her village of 200 people, or the generation above, or the generation above, or the generation above, had ever visited another country. For the 300 years in that village, and every person in it, not a single person had visited another country. I remember when I went to that village, one of my like distant cousins was like, came up to me and was like, did you come here in an airplane? And I was like, yeah, man, of course. I was like 9. And he's like, but how did you get here in an airplane? And I was like, I don't know, dude. Like I sat in the seat. And he looked at me and was like, how do you not fall out? And I was like, what the? And then it clicked. The only mode of transportation this kid has ever seen is a cart that is attached to an ox. How do you go so fast and not fall out? So the social system that our parents learned involved tight-knit communities. That's what human beings have evolved into. So what we teach our kids, we just like kind of show up like in that village. You don't need to explicitly teach kids social skills because they show up, they go to school, they see the same 30 kids. Half of those kids are going to get married. They're going to have families. They're going to see each other every day in the town square. There's no fracturing. And so what's happened is as the internet has grown, people have been more fractured. And so what's happening is there's a need for parents to intervene in a way that they never have before because like society just didn't work like that. And the end result is we have a bunch of people who aren't taught how to maintain social relationships. The reason the parents don't really teach it is because they really weren't taught it. But the thing is, for them, they didn't really need to learn because society was structured in such a way where you sort of had persistent contacts, right? You went to work every day and you saw the same people, and then you went to barbecues and all this kind of good stuff. But now we're working from home. Now we're freelancers. Now we're this. Now we're that. Now people are moving away to different, like moving is like not that wild, right? It's not like people are like, oh my God, if you moved, how did you take your house? I didn't take my house. I rented a place over there. It's like, oh my God, that's so weird. So society is changing. And so once you start to realize this, what I realize as a psychiatrist is that when I work with these people and they don't maintain relationships, it's not because they're losers. It's because they were literally never taught. And I sort of almost like realized, I was like, oh, this is this person's karma. So when I was trying to make sense of this, right, there's a scientific angle. But when it comes down to it, I can't fix their parenting and I can't fix their what society does or doesn't do. I can't fix or change the fact that we're entering the digital age. So how do I help this person? And what I did is I conceptualized it as their karma. And this is really important for a mindset shift, right? So I want y'all to understand this. If you think you're a 25-year-old loner, I want you to think about all the confluence of events that have made you who you are today. Do you get to choose where you're born? Do you get to choose when you're born? Do you get to choose who your parents are? Because if we're saying that excellent parenting is a differentiating factor here, and we're not saying that the parents are bad, it's just they just don't know that they need to teach this. If you were born 100 years ago, would you have this problem? Right? There are all kinds of things that you don't control about your circumstances. This is your karma. Now, karma sometimes comes with all these weird like associations like, oh, you deserve this and reincarnation, but forget about that. What we know is that even scientifically, there's a confluence of events, and this is what we learn as psychiatrists, is there's a confluence of events that makes a human being. Their parenting, their attachment style, whether traumatic experiences happen, like literally whether like when you went to a birthday party, what were you taught? What is the right way to maintain relationships? How many times a year did you call your cousins who live on the opposite side of the country? Just to talk. Because I know that like my parents made me call random people in India who I had never met and say hi to them. But what they did in that moment is instill in me and teach me a particular social skill. I was like, I don't know who this person is. They're like, no, you have to talk to them for 5 minutes. And I was like, this sucks, but I did it. They made me do it. And now it's like, I know how to maintain a relationship because they taught me. So much, just think about what you were really taught about maintaining relationships. If you struggle to maintain a relationship, even at the age of 25, do your parents sit down with you and say, hey, you seem kind of lonely. Like, what are you doing? Like, did your parents even maintain relationships? And so once you start to realize, and what I discovered as a psychiatrist is there's no such thing as a loser. Does not exist. It's a judgment that we make out of ignorance of what is this person's circumstances, what is their upbringing, what were they taught, what were they given. And what I started to see is there's no such thing as a loser, it's just their karma. Does that mean that they deserve it? That's not what karma is about. Karma is about understanding what are all the 1,000 different things that form together to create a human being in the year 2022 at the age of 25. And how much does that person control? Very little. So now we get to something really important. And once I share that with that person, once we can get on the same page, hey, there's a lot of stuff that actually is not your fault. Once we remove loser from the equation, then something really magical starts to happen. Because now you begin to realize, okay, it's not my fault that I'm here, but it's absolutely my responsibility to do something about it. Then the question becomes, what can I do? So There are a couple of steps to this. The first, and we're going to kind of summarize this because people say this. The first is don't blame yourself for all of it, right? You can blame yourself for some of it, but this is what we're sort of talking about. Take a karmic perspective. What were you taught about maintaining relationships? Once you don't blame yourself, next thing that you've got to figure out is what are you truly responsible for? So step one is get rid of all of the blame. Step two is, okay, what am I responsible for? Now, here's where the mind is going to do a really important trick. When you start to think about what you're responsible for, if you're not careful, you'll start thinking about shoulds. I should do this. I should do that. I should do this. I should be able to do this. I should. Shooting yourself in the foot. The right question isn't what you should do. The right question is what can you do? So when I'm thinking about a goal, like let's say I'm here, I should be here. I have so much potential. I should be able to get an A. I should be able to maintain relationships. The gap between here and here is wide. And as I take one step forward, I'm unsatisfied. Because look at what I should have accomplished all this. And so progress actually makes you feel worse. And if in the system of your mind, progress makes you feel worse because anytime you take a step forward, all you focus on is the 9 steps that you didn't take forward, you're never going to get there. So I was once working with a East Asian kid, adolescent in high school. And says, I came, was really depressed, right? So his parents had brought me to my office with so much frustration at the end of their rope. They're like, my kid keeps on bringing up, basically what they were saying, tried to cover it up, is like, my kid keeps on bringing up this depression crap. So can you please fix him? Because he keeps on bringing up this excuse. And as I talked to the kid, I was like, why do you feel sad? And he says, for once in my life, I got a 93 on a test, on a calculus test. I told my parents asked me, what grade did you get? I said, I got a 93. And for once in my life, all I want from my parents is instead of looking at the 7 questions I got wrong, I wish they would look at the 93 questions I got right. Just once. I want them to look at the 93 questions I got right. But they never look at the 93. All they ever look at is the 7 questions I got wrong. And if you take one step forward in your life and you say to yourself, this isn't what I should do. I should be better. I should be able to accomplish more. You are doing the same damn thing as that kid's parents. You're just focusing on the stuff that you failed to do. And what is that going to do for your motivation? So be very careful when I start to ask you, okay, what are you responsible for in terms of social improvement and making friends and all this kind of stuff? Your mind is going to populate, automatically catch it with all the 1,000 things you should do. That's not how you move forward. And this is what we mean in the yogic tradition. We say, live in the present. You will see it on all of the blogs and Instagrams and whatnot. Live in the present. Present is good. What does that mean? That means what can you do, not what should you do. Because you're here. This is the future. This is the should. It's to look over here. Instead, look over here because this is where you are. And ask yourself, what can I do today? Forget about what you should do. Forget about your potential. Forget about all that kind of stuff. Today, if you are a 25-year-old loner, what can you do today? And do that thing. And you can say, I can't do anything. That's okay too. So it's really asking yourself, what can you do? Because the answer isn't nothing. I can't go out. I should go to a bar and make friends, but I can't go out to a bar and make friends. Okay, fine. Can you message someone on Discord? Can you send a text to an old friend of yours? Can you respond to your group, your work group's WhatsApp group, whatever. Your work WhatsApp group or your work Signal chat or whatever. What can you do? And start with those things. And something magical will happen when you forget about the should and you forget about the future and you focus on what you can do. Your goal is to do something, whatever. And then as you really start with what you can do, not what you should do, you focus on that thing. And as you do that, at the end of the day, you will have a success behind you instead of a failure, even though the action is the same. Right? Because I can send a message to a friend of mine and say, hey, what's up? You want to catch up sometime? But if my goal is to make 1,000 friends, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to be like, this pathetic loser, all he can do is message someone online. And then the same action can be progress or success, or it can be a sign of your overwhelming hopelessness as a human being. And so start with that thing. Just start with what you can do. And your mind will create all kinds of judgments. Let them come. It's okay. It'll judge. And say, you know what? I did what I can do today. And this is what's pretty neat about that. For people who are skeptical, but they're like, I'll never get there. So I was working on the stroke unit at the Massachusetts General Hospital. These are people who have strokes and can't walk anymore. How do you get someone who can't walk anymore to walk? One step at a time. What can you move? Okay, let's figure out, can you wiggle your toes? All right, great. Can you lift your leg? All right, great. Can you take a step? Not really. Okay, we're just going to lift legs today. Just wiggle your toes and lift your leg, curl, flex your ankle, extend at the knee joint, flex at the knee joint. Let's just start where we are. And this is literally the scientifically valid, proven process that physical therapists will do with people who have lost a chunk of their brain. And these amazing human beings that are physical therapists can take a human being who has lost a chunk of their brain and get them fucking walking again. That's the strategy that we need to implement for our mind. Start with where you are. Take one step forward. And as you do that day after day after day after day, and this is where your mind is going to say, oh my God, that's so exhausting. It's going to take such a long time. We don't care about that because what are we focusing on? Today. Forget about it. We're not worried about tomorrow. Don't think about tomorrow. The more you start to think about tomorrow, we're moving towards the future. Oh my God, I have to do this 100 days, 1,000 days. How many days will it take to catch up? All bad thoughts. Not going to be productive. It's the future thinking mind. Just going to do it today. Just going to do it today. Just going to do it today. And if you learn to do that, and then start to accumulate other things like resources and stuff like that, because what you can do today isn't always action. It can also be like learning, right? So even if I don't know how to go out to a bar, can I practice social skills somewhere else, right? That's why we have Social Sandbox on Discord. Can I learn a little bit about motivation? Okay, that's why we have Dr. K's Guide. Can I learn a little bit more about anxiety and social anxiety? Okay, like that also, you can maybe go see a therapist. You can watch Dr. K's Guide. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. The key is do something today. Whatever you can do. And accept that. And hopefully if you keep doing that, you won't be a 25-year-old loner. Or if you are a 25-year-old loner, you won't be a 26-year-old loner. Questions? AT Field is saying, what the Social Sandbox? How does it work? Great question. So, Social Sandbox is in Discord. So here's what we realized. Parents aren't teaching y'all how to socialize properly. And by properly, it's not their fault because the world has changed. As we start to use Discord and online things, we start to become more socially anxious. The parts of our brain, this is kind of a really interesting concept. So part of the reason that I think the subjective experience of social anxiety is increasing is because the parts of our brain that reassure us in social situations are actually starting to become vestigial or atrophy. So when I interact with human beings in person, there are parts of my brain that interpret body language, and they do it without our awareness. So when I sit around and if I'm a 7-year-old and I spend every day playing with my friends outside, I learn to interpret body language. 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. And then when I'm hanging out with people when I'm 16, that part of my brain works really well. and it interprets all the body language, and it tells me, hey, you're doing fine. Everyone here likes you. When we start communicating online, that part of the brain shuts off. Just like a language that we don't practice, our brain is like, hey, we don't need this thing anymore. So our ability to be reassured by body language and behavioral signals decreases. As that part of our brain decreases, when we enter social situations, we no longer have reassurance from that, which results in increased social anxiety. So the more that we use the internet as a communication tool, the more socially anxious we become. So we discovered this at HG. And so we decided, hey, you know what? Let's just give people a chance literally to practice talking. It's a sandbox where you can come in and just have a conversation intentionally. It's not just about socializing on Discord. It's intentionally to learn the skills of socializing. Right? People are going to be there, going to ask you, okay, let's talk. And then as you struggle to talk, a coach is going to be there and going to be like, okay, what are you feeling right now? Let's figure out how to overcome those feelings. Let's try again. And what it is, I don't know how to say this, but like you can jump into the water and teach yourself to swim eventually, or you can go to a swimming class and within the span of 2 weeks, you can learn how to swim with focused intention. And this is the thing for people who feel behind in life. They're like, oh my God, it's so hard to learn. It's so hard to learn on your own. I completely agree. If you try to figure out yourself, it'll take you 5 years. But with the help of someone who knows what they're doing, you can learn a language in 1 month. You can learn to swim in 2 weeks. You can learn to ride a bike in a day. You can learn how to talk to another human being in a couple of weeks. It just requires focused practice, right? Focused guidance. Jade06 is saying, I've been lonely for years and I feel stressed when socializing and I can't tolerate anymore making my feelings even worse. Should I just give up? No. You should do it differently. So I think that there's what's making you want to give up. The feelings have piled up. So what you've got to do is clean out the feelings. Right? So anytime, so this is important to understand about how the mind works. We have a mind. When our mind has a negative experience, it comes with negative emotion. When we have a pile of negative emotion in our mind, we have two options. We can process it or we can numb it. As we turn to technology, which is so damn accessible, we numb it, right? So if I'm awkward at a party, I'll give y'all an example. Let's say I feel awkward at a party. What do? I flip out and I start scrolling on my phone. What happens to the awkwardness? It kind of gets pushed to the back. It's kind of still there. It doesn't really get fixed, but it becomes more tolerable. And then I leave the party because no one is talking to me for an hour. Why is no one talking to me for an hour? Because I'm on my fucking phone. And then you're like, man, I feel like such a loser. No one wants to talk to me. And then you take those bundle of emotions with you. Some people may say the answer is just get off your phone, noob. No, it's not the answer. Because if you could do it, you would have done it. Right? So then when you take those pile of emotions, now what happens is the next time you go to the party, how do you feel going in? You carry those pile of emotions with you. Your brain has been wired to do this. Same mechanism of PTSD. As you enter and there's music playing and stuff like that, your brain is like, oh, by the way, we've been in this environment before. This environment sucks. Up comes the upsurging of negative emotions that you had from the last time that you went home, you had a couple drinks, you played some video games, you didn't process it at all. So all those emotions are waiting for you. They're like, hey, here we are. And so as those emotions come surging in, what do? Here's the phone. Start scrolling. Cycle repeats itself. So if you're in this situation, it can feel like your only choice is to suffer or give up. But what you've really got to do is take all those emotions that have piled up and process them or vent them in some way. Right? So therapy is a good option, for sure. There are all kinds of things like meditation, journaling, going for long walks, just letting those emotions come out in a safe way and venting them, unburdening yourself. Coaching can help with that too. But the goal in coaching, if you go to it in coaching, coaching isn't just going to sit there and listen to your emotions. It's not a venting space. If that's what y'all are looking for, therapy is more appropriate. We're not saying that you can't vent there, but the goal of coaching, and this is all arguably also true of therapy. I've read some really interesting articles about what therapy is and isn't recently. Really interesting. But the goal in coaching is really going to be to change your behavior and get you to be able to go to the party and like have fun there. So venting emotion and sort of working through that is like a necessary step to moving forward. Also, not a bad idea to just get a straight up clinical evaluation for something like social anxiety. Great question, though. Dr. K, could you do a stream on good parenting, on like mindful parenting and parenting styles? I could do a stream. I think the challenge is that a stream won't cut it. So here's been our experience with parenting. The first is that we've got a whole course on good parenting. I mean, it's not really a course on good parenting. It's a course on communication and boundary setting, essentially. It's a course designed for parents whose kids are struggling with technology addiction. So we've got that. And why is it in a course format? It's because it like builds, right? So this is the shortcoming of things like Twitch and YouTube, is that they don't build. It's like a bite-sized thing. That's what the platform is designed for, right? Twitch streams and YouTube videos are designed to be wholly like isolated, independent things. So there are some formats that are superior to these like it's just the platform. Like if you think about a course at a university, like the whole point of the course is that week 2 and week 3 and week 4 build on week 1, and each builds on the next. And when it really comes to good parenting, that's how we approach it. We also have a couple of like add-ons, right? Like, so almost DLCs of sort. So there's some stuff about parenting in our upcoming guide about how to parent a kid with ADHD, because that's what's really interesting. Is we always like think about, oh, my parents failed me because they didn't parent good enough. So the really interesting thing, if you have a diagnosis of ADHD, there is strong evidence that it shapes your parents' parenting style, increases their depression, and increases their stress level. It's not your fault. I mean, you didn't ask to be born with ADHD, but there are bi-directional effects when it comes to parenting and ADHD. So we go into that nuance, which is something that a lot of parents feel super guilty and kids blame them, and it's like a really unhealthy kind of thing. Parents don't realize that it's not their fault that having a neuroatypical child makes like it hard to be a parent, because the rules of parenting change. We've been taught particular rules about how to parent, and when you have a child who's not neurotypical, you have to change the rules. You have to adapt to the rules. And the cool thing is that when you adapt the rules to the needs of the child, then everyone gets better. There's even been studies that show that if you have a parent with anxiety and a child with anxiety, if you treat the parent's anxiety without touching the child's anxiety improves. There's a lot to dive into, and I don't think a single stream will cut it. That being said, if y'all have, I love the question, Peacock Lover, and if y'all have more specific, like, can you do parenting about, like, if there's an isolated, independent thing that we can cover in an hour, I'm happy to do it. Alim Haha is asking, is being a 25-year-old loner okay? Yes. It's okay to be a 25-year-old loner, and you should do something about it. See, that's the thing, is like, we start to live in a society where we think we should only do stuff, we should only act when things are wrong. I disagree. Excellent question. XBobBX. What happens when you do your thing for the day and text an old friend, but they never end up responding? Completely irrelevant. Remember, we started this discussion with what are you responsible for and what is the rest of the world responsible for? In that question, we see something really, really tricky, which is you are starting to accept responsibility for the behavior of another person. If they don't respond, how do you feel about yourself? You feel like a loser. That's what screws you. Not your fault that they didn't respond. Should have no impact on your self-worth or what you do tomorrow. Didn't work. No big deal. Let's move on. Tomorrow, what can I do today? Same thing. Same thing. Does not matter at all. What you control is your actions, not the outcomes of your actions. If I failed a test, but I studied 8 hours a day for the 10 days before the test, not my fault. Now, is there something to be learned from that? Oh, yeah, by the way, I studied for the wrong test. Right? I'm not saying that there isn't corrective behavior on your part, but like, you can't control whether other people respond. All you can control is what you can do. So then maybe there's a learning there, right? So tomorrow, what can you do? Maybe if you're reaching out to a different friend, take a look at your message and try to figure out, okay, what could I say that could be a little bit different? Is there some way I can improve? And if you do that, you'll get there. 100%. Or I guess 99%. I feel confident, I should say. Right? Because I don't know that the outcome isn't something that I can predict. So Scary Printer Sounds is saying it just takes commitment. That is both correct and incorrect. So it doesn't even, this is the scary thing. 99% of the time, Scary Printer Sounds is right. It just takes commitment. 1% though, there's no such thing as commitment. There's just what you do today. Commitment is hard. There's just what you do. It doesn't take commitment. It just takes today. Just today. Just today. Just today. How do I improve my social skills when somebody who has social anxiety disorder and can barely handle? How do I improve my social skills with somebody? Or I'm going to assume that, so Desania Kale is asking, how do I improve my social skills? I'm going to assume as somebody who has social anxiety disorder. So if you have a clinical diagnosis, the first step is treatment, right? So there's certain treatments that you can use that will reduce the burden of that diagnosis. And then you go out and you rehabilitate. And this is where I think therapists have fallen short, because we become so overwhelmed by like the severity of mental illness that we don't really do like psychology rehab. But that's what a lot of these people need. So if you've grown up with social anxiety your whole life, you have to start with treatment. But the challenge is that treatment is not a substitute for 10 years of atrophied social skills with living with social anxiety. What we need is like psychological rehab. And we'll even have this in some parts of psychiatry or psychology, where you'll have some kinds of like professional rehab and things like that. Where like, so I trained at this place called McLean Hospital, and McLean Hospital has really good programs for people to like learn how to have a job. So they'll set you up with like an internship at a nonprofit or something like that, where you like learn how to show up every day on time. You get a task, assigned some kind of tasks, and then you kind of go home. And so you learn some of these core skills, which you can feel pathetic for not learning. But if you've lived with mental illness that has deprived you of normal developmental milestones, you've got to make up for it. Okay. So Avi Rhoda is asking, what if I feel like I have nothing to say? This is what I want you to do. I want you to go back and watch any interview that we've done. And I want you to pay attention to what Dr. K says. For the first half hour of any interview, does Dr. K have anything to say? Absolutely not. Maybe here or there. I'm sure you can prove that statement wrong. You don't have to have anything to say to have a conversation. All you have to do is be willing to listen. That's what it takes to have a conversation. Don't need anything to say. If you've got nothing to say on the subject, doesn't mean you can't talk about it. Case in point, I have friends who talk about finance all the time. I got nothing to say about finance. So when I participate in those conversations, most of what it is me learning. It's like, hey, can you explain what this means? Can you help me understand that? All you need. Right? Kind of interesting. At some point, you may have something to say. Then you can share it. Okay, I'm going to try to catch up with a couple of comments. Do you think it's late to socialize at 31? I feel too old for every social activity. I see 20ers for the most part. It's never too late to socialize. I'm not saying that you're not going to feel old or out of place if you start hanging out with a bunch of 20-year-olds, but it's not too late. It's just, let's be clear. If you're a 31-year-old and you hang out with a bunch of like mid-20-somethings, you're going to feel out of place. Does that mean it's too late to socialize? No. It just means that you feel out of place. That's it. It's just a feeling. It's not a truth. It's just a feeling. I realized this front and center. Like when I started residency, average age of people was like 25, 26, maybe 27 actually. And I was like 31, 32. Like people are still, some of them are getting married, some of them are married. Like I'm having kids. And so like, it's weird. I started med school at the age of 28. Most people started at the age of like 22. I'm coming up on 30. I had my 30th birthday in med school. And they're like, yeah, 24, let's go party. And I'm like, I'm 30, dude. So it's totally okay to be older than like people. You're just older. It means I can still study. I can still hang out with them. If you're hanging out with people who are in their 20s and going to a concert, like even if you're 31 and they're 25, both of y'all can listen to the music. So focus on what you're there for. I'm not saying it's easy, but let's be precise about whether it's possible and what's truly getting in the way. What's getting in the way is here. Okay. For some reason, I see a lot of questions about substance use and drugs. And like, I feel like that's a little bit off topic. We can absolutely talk about it. Okay, let's move on. Man, so like, this is both what I love and find very difficult about streaming. This is exactly why we did this. Is that we could have one conversation and reach a lot of people. The challenge is that the number of questions, I can never win. Win isn't the right word. I can never be done. Because the number of questions which y'all generate will always, always, always outpace the number of answers that I can give. And so what this necessitates is that 99% of you will be unanswered, despite the fact that we're helping people at a scale, right? We're answering, more people are getting answers through this format, and the majority of people aren't getting answers. It's kind of weird, right? Because when I used to do primarily clinical work, one person would come in and we'd answer questions for a year. Once a week, you come in for an hour. We're going to talk. You're going to ask questions. We're going to come up with answers together for a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So one human being can generate so many questions. And there's just, can't get to them all. They're all fantastic. Okay. Yeah. Margelatu saying you're doing a great job. Keep at it. I appreciate that. I'm not saying I'm doing a bad job. I'm just appreciating the impossibility of this situation. Right? And acknowledging that this is what focusing on the present is like. There's no way I'm going to be able to answer all the questions. And we're just going to keep going. Who cares? I mean, I care. But like, we're still going to do the work that needs to be done. What can we do today? What we can do today is... So unknown is saying clone Dr. K. That's like literally where we started a coaching program. That's what we tried to do, is clone Dr. K. That's like literally where the thought came from. It's like, okay, hold on a second. How special am I? Can what I do be taught? And the answer is a portion of it can. And that's what coaching is, right? So that's where like the part that I do that coaches can't do, for example, like clinical stuff, they can't do that. So I may be able to integrate clinical treatment for a mood disorder with some of the spirituality and finding direction in life. Other therapists may be able to do that too. But what we've noticed is that a lot of people who are in mental health treatment don't have support around the other stuff. They can take a medication that helps reduce the physiologic effects of social anxiety, but no psychiatrist is spending time with them, helping socially rehabilitate them. And helping them like overcome those internal barriers to like practice social skills, role play with them, or things like that, right? Or not, no psychiatrists, some do, but it's very rare. Yeah. So, I mean, people are saying Dr. K mass production is what Dazzle83 is saying, and Gazar is saying, I need that help. That's what we tried to do, right? So that's also why we have things like career coaching. So what we realize is there's a lot of career-specific stuff that we never get taught. So I'll just give you all a simple example. So if you're unhappy at work, what I love about career coaching is that we'll sit down and we'll like understand why you're unhappy, understand what the situation at work is, understand what your contribution is, and what the work's contribution is. So here's what I have a lot of problems with is that a lot of times when you look at a worker conflict, everyone will blame the employer. And in other situations, people who come into my office will blame themselves. But really, it's an interaction. This is what the research on burnout shows. Burnout happens, it's a relational diagnosis. It can't exist just with an employer, and it can't exist entirely with an employee. This is why burnout is getting worse. Because employers are like, oh, like let's equip an employee with resources so that they fix the burnout. They're not addressing their own systemic concerns. And then employees will say, I'm burnt out because my workplace is toxic. And they don't accept responsibility for their internal contributions. We did an awesome interview months ago with someone who was burnt out as a developer. If you pay attention to that interview, it's beautiful what it illustrates. Because that person was like, I want to be the hero on Monday morning. So when there's a problem on Friday at 5 p.m. when everyone goes home for the weekend, and we're going to deal with it next week, I want to come in on Monday morning and be a boss and have it fixed. So I work all through the weekend. And then my boss says, don't do that. You didn't have to do that, but doesn't actually stop it, right? So it's an intersectional component. So when it comes to career coaching, we start to understand those. And then we even role play, okay, like, what are you going to say to your boss to advocate to yourself? Oh, I'm so anxious about advocating for myself to my boss. What if they think I'm ungrateful? Let's talk about that. Let's work through those feelings. Let's plan out what you're going to say. Do you feel good about saying this? Does this come across as ungrateful? Well, kind of. Okay, let's figure out how to modify the language. How can you advocate for yourself in a way that doesn't come across as ungrateful? Beautiful. Let's practice. How do you feel about that? I'm going to be the boss. You're going to be yourself. Let's practice. Now we're going to flip it over. I want you to pretend to be the boss. And I want you to try to get as upset as you can. And I'm going to talk. And you see how it feels when I come to you and I say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Do you feel like, no, it's not like, I'm not upset with you. I actually feel like grateful that you're bringing this to my attention. Wow. And then they go in the next day and they say it. And their boss receives it well. So there's all kinds of lessons about how to live life that we don't get taught. And that's what we're trying to fix. That's what I found in India. Okay. Eli King 2G is asking, can you answer the question I asked before because people want to know? I don't know what the question you asked before was. I'm trying to keep up. Let me scroll up a little bit. What about bore out? Ooh. We'll get to that in a second. Am I done with the loner stuff? Sort of. Let's move on. Okay. Venting and processing is like, I want to get to a couple of things today. Maybe they'll relate to that. Let me just see. Good questions. I think we have a video about, oh, okay. So this isn't going to be precisely about, I'm looking at questions in Twitch chat right now, but this isn't precisely going to be about some of this stuff, but I think there's a good thing that we should cover, which I think is going to touch on what a lot of people are asking about. So what we're going to talk a little bit about is self-esteem. So let's take a look. Why should I have self-esteem? I don't agree with the idea of having self-esteem if you don't have reasons to. Many people focus on having confidence, high self-esteem, and self-love. But should all people pursue it? Personally, I don't see many reasons to have high self-esteem. I don't have many good sides, and it's not low self-esteem. It's just logical that I don't think highly of myself. I don't see why I should have high self-image when there's nothing to be proud about. Hating yourself is not always a sign of low self-esteem. Sometimes it's a sign of a realistic self-image. And kind of paired with that, I feel like being mentally healthy is a scam. I graduated last year and started working. I also worked on my skills to get a job. At the start of this year, I got a job in a startup and I'm making 5 to 7 times the average salary of my country. In the meantime, I also got fitter and looked better. In the past 5 months, I started really working on my mental health. I started going to a psychologist and was beginning to feel better about myself. I started feeling like I looked better and started skipping the gym, not focusing enough on my work and partying. When I was in a party, I received a comment about not being good enough for a girl, and that made me realize that my main motivation to do better is not feeling enough and not being good enough. When I started to feel content, I got overly confident and thought I was good enough. Now I don't know what to do because that comment burned me. I stopped going to the psychologist and started dieting and focusing on making money. I feel like I can't achieve unless I am driven by negative feelings, but at the same time, it gives me deep sadness. So what should I give up? So self-esteem is kind of weird. Everyone says you should have self-esteem. You should be confident about yourself. You should feel good about yourself. And some people are like, well, first of all, what if I genuinely have nothing to be confident about? What if I don't deserve confidence? What if I don't have anything to be proud of? And on the flip side, or not even on the flip side, on the same side, some people are like, hey, by the way, when I become content and happy with myself, I start to suck at life. And when I beat myself up, I do better. So what's up with this? So now I've got another point for y'all. If we're supposed to feel good about ourselves, and if we're supposed to be confident about ourselves, why on earth is it so easy to feel bad about ourselves? Why does it feel like self-esteem is a house of cards that we painstakingly put together, but all it takes is one thing to knock it all down? I'm talking about biologically. Forget about morality and all that crap. Why is the human brain so good at feeling bad about itself? Do y'all get this? So if the majority of people in the world feel bad about themselves, is that the way we're supposed to work or the way we're not supposed to work? Is this a bug or is it a feature? What is our brain actually designed for? And if you are struggling with developing good self-esteem, if you are struggling because you don't think you deserve self-esteem, if you are struggling because when you start to feel better about yourself, you start to do less, you got to pay attention to what we're talking about today. Because today we're going to talk about dirty motivators. So let's understand a couple of different things, okay? the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a couple of terms. All right? Let me grab this. Okay. Give me a second. So let's define terms. Okay, and we're going to have to draw. It do be like that sometimes, all right? Okay. So, first thing that we're going to define, we got to figure out what ego and self-esteem mean. So first thing we're going to do is define ego. Ego is who I am, or my sense of identity. Self-esteem is how I judge my ego or identity. Okay? So ego is what I believe myself to be, and self-esteem is the way that I judge that. So there's an identity, and then over here, there's a part of your brain that is judging that. Right? This is the ego. This is the self-esteem. Now, there's a lot of really interesting neuroscience here. So this part, by the way, also correlates with the default mode network. The default mode network is the part of our brain that allows us to be reflective about ourselves. So this is something that isn't necessarily uniquely human, but is very powerful in humans. So whereas a lot of animals, for example, will learn like stimulus response. If I do this, this is good. If I do this, that's bad. If I take this action, this works. If I take this action, that doesn't work. If I take this action, this does work. So what animals will do is they'll focus on this, stimulus response. What humans are capable of doing is based on this, we can look back over here. So let's say I've got X, I'm screwing this up, or these actions are not doing well. So what the human being is capable of doing is reflecting on itself and saying, it's not the action, it's this that's the problem. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change this into this, and then we're going to see checks. Does this make sense? We're allowed not to just work at the level of action. We can reflect about ourselves, change something on a meta level, and then we see a lot of changes. This is what the default mode network gets us. What does it cost us is depression. So we know that when we have a hyperactive default mode network, that if we keep on looking back after each of these things and trying to change this thing, even though we're getting checks, what we end up with is depression. So if you look at the mind of a depressed person, what you see is like they'll look at their family and they'll say, oh, these people will be better off without me. Even though there's a check over here, their mind cannot stop thinking about themselves. When your partner who you've been married to for 50 years says, I love you, I don't want you to go anywhere, you cannot think about what your partner is saying, and instead you just focus on your perception of self. Hyperactive default mode network. All in Dr. K's guide to depression. Interesting things about the default mode network. Psychedelics, meditation, and ketamine all seem to short circuit the default mode network. When we short circuit the default mode network, depression improves. We stop thinking about ourselves. Okay? And then, because here's what happens in depression. Once we stop doing this, we start to see this, and we start to see this, and we start to see this. And then we start to feel better. Next thing to understand is why on earth is it so easy to have low self-esteem? So this too is evolutionary in nature. The first thing to understand is that our brain is biased towards the negative. So if I go to a party and someone says, actually, let's do it this way. If someone says 5 nice things to me, and they say 1 not nice thing to me, what is my brain going to focus on? It's going to focus on this. Right? Even in cancel culture, you can have someone who does it right 90% of the time. All they got to do is do it wrong once, or 10% of the time, and they're gone. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how it is. I'm not trying to pass a judgment on that. So other examples of this are, let's say like eating at a restaurant, right? So I can eat at a restaurant 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, not get sick, and then I get me some food poisoning. Never going back. Really hard to go back. Why is this? So this is because our brain is biased towards the negative more than the positive. And that's a survival thing, right? Like if I wrestle with a tiger 3 times and I'm fine, and I wrestle with a tiger a 4th time and I lose an arm, I ain't gonna wrestle with the tiger again. If someone is like, well, 75% of the time I don't lose an arm, that person will die. The genes will not move forward. So what we've learned as human beings is that we are all biased towards the negative. Second thing is, if we are biased towards the negative, what does that do in terms of behavioral change? What we find is that this changes behavior, right? That's what we're kind of saying. Strongly, very, very strongly. And so then what we discover is once we realize that, like, if I go to a party and I feel ashamed about myself, that's a very hard thing to overcome, because negative emotions shape behavior very strongly. And so then what we discover is that that is actually adaptive to human beings. If I do something in my village and 10 people are like, you should be ashamed of yourself, and I did not let that shame change my behavior, what would happen? I would persist in the behavior. I would be ostracized. My genes wouldn't pass on. And what we actually discover is that even today, this is true. What we discover today is the dirty motivator. And what do I mean by the dirty motivator? Medical students beat themselves up all the time. They're very high in neuroticism, which means their internal space is an unpleasant space. So there are some kids who, like, they'll study 4 hours a day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then on Friday, they're like, I've studied enough. I feel prepared. I'm going to go have some fun tonight. The kid who is pre-med is like, oh my God, other people are going to do better than me. I haven't studied enough. What if I don't get in? I better not go to a party today. I really got to stay. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Who gets the better grade? Kid who goes to the party gets a 3.8. Kid who stays at the library because they're beating themselves up gets a 4.0. So here's the crazy thing about dirty motivators. Shame, low self-esteem are very, very powerful at getting us to act. Right? So let's say I'm procrastinating for a test. I need to do it. I'm procrastinating. And then 72 hours before the test, panic sets in. Oh my God, I'm going to fail out. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my scholarship. Negative emotion. And what do you do once the panic and fear rise to a high level? You fucking study. So dirty motivators and negative emotions, why is it so easy for us to have low self-esteem? Because it works. Because it works. That's why. It's like nuclear energy, where it's radioactive, but boy, can it power a lot. It gets the job done, but it leaves us burned. That's what a dirty motivator is. And all of these negative emotions in this low self-esteem, especially as we saw in that second story, this is how it works. Why do so many people struggle with it? Because it's been evolutionary selected for, and it's one hell of a power source. Pollutes the shit out of your mind, but it'll get the job done. And what do we want? We want to get the job done. We want to earn 5 to 7 times the national average. We want to be able to get promoted. We want to be able to have money. We want to be able to look good and feel good and be healthy. And I'm happy to flagellate myself up here in order to accomplish it. Another interesting point to support this. Where do you see, okay, so in the mind of someone who has imposter syndrome, how do they feel about themselves? Terrible low self-esteem. I'm a friggin' imposter. I don't belong here. I don't deserve to be here. Where do people have the most imposter syndrome? The higher you perform, the greater your chance of imposter syndrome is. Right? You don't like see people who are like, let's say, have no job, going nowhere in life, no money, maybe homeless, whatever. When someone is at the bottom of the barrel, they have a lot of complaints. They may feel terrible about themselves, but no one is like, I'm an imposter. They don't say like, oh my God, I'm an imposter. I'm not a real loser. Oh my God, I'm going nowhere in life. And I'm actually a highly successful individual pretending to be a loser. You never hear that. What you actually hear is the exact opposite. I'm in a situation. I'm a programmer at Google. I'm a managing director at Goldman Sachs. I'm a student at Harvard Medical School, and I feel like an imposter. Do y'all see that? And so why is it that we have a bunch of imposters at these high caliber places? It's because that feeling of inadequacy, which is, by the way, why I don't belong, right? Because like, I'm not as good as those other people. It's that feeling of inadequacy, which has been your radioactive fuel, which has allowed you to succeed. This is the dirty motivator. And this is why negative emotions, people are wondering, why do I suffer so much? Oh my God. Why is my self-esteem so bad? It's because self-esteem actually works wonders. Low self-esteem works wonders. Okay? So now let's talk a little bit about, okay, fine, Dr. K, I accept your premise. What do we do about it? The first thing is to understand that your dirty motivators are not enemies. They're not problems. They're actually solutions. They do a lot for you. That's why everyone uses them. That's why they're so common. So what do they do for you? Let's understand this. The first is that they protect you. So if you've got low self-esteem, it's armor against rejection, against failure. And you may say, well, what do you mean? How do you mean it's armor against rejection? If I have low self-esteem and I'm attracted to someone, do I even ask them out? Of course not. And thereby, do I protect myself against rejection? My mind warns me. It says, no, no, no. Don't ask them out. Don't do it. Don't do it, bro. Don't do it, girl. You can't let your feelings be known. They will reject you and then you will feel hurt. Let me protect you. Don't even bother. Let me protect you from rejection and failure. Because you can't fail if you don't try. And this is the other thing that we tend to do. When we've got self-esteem, another aspect of this armor is self-sabotage. Why? So when I even try to do something, I'm not going to give 100% effort. Why am I not going to give 100% effort? If I have low self-esteem, no one with low self-esteem gives it all, their all. Why? Because then when you fail, you've got an excuse. I could have done it if I tried. But if you gave it your all, and then you failed, then you're one hell of a loser. But if you leave yourself a little out, if you give yourself some little escape, then you're not a loser because you didn't try 100%. But in order to give yourself that escape, what you're actually doing is screwing yourself over. Because anything that you try, you're not trying 100%. And that's like a great way to live a mediocre life, is to never give it your all. So how do we get rid of the dirty motivator? The first thing that we've got to do is understand what it does for us. Understand that last minute panic is a great way to get things done. Procrastination isn't a problem, it's a solution. It ain't a bug, it's a feature. That's why everyone does it. Why does everyone have eyes? Is that a bug or a feature? It's a feature. If everyone does it, it's a feature. It's not a bug. Now, here's why it's hard to get off of dirty motivators. Because the second you switch off of a dirty motivator, remember that they actually lead to good things, right? So like we saw it in this post right here, it's a scam. Making 5 times oh, sorry, y'all can't see this. Okay, there we go. So what was I saying? Yeah, so like, why don't we use, first thing to understand about dirty motivators is that when we use them, we actually do well, right? So when this person, like, before they felt content, got at a job at a startup, making a bunch of money, getting fitter, looking better, started seeing a psychologist, started feeling confident in themselves, stopped working. So here's the other thing to understand about using a dirty motivator. When you stop using dirty fuel, your performance will, for a brief period of time, decrease. And you have to be prepared for that. In the switch over from this easy access, nuclear radioactive crap, which is really powerful but hurts us, anytime we switch over to another fuel, there's going to be like a loss in like productivity and efficiency. And you've got to be prepared for that. It's going to be a bumpy road. Okay? So this is what people don't realize is that, and this is why they stay stuck kind of in a low self-esteem situation, is because as your self-esteem starts to improve, life is actually not going to become easier. It's going to become harder for a period of time during that transition. And this is exactly why people don't stick with stuff when it starts to make them feel better. Because like, I've lived my whole life using negative self-esteem as a fuel for accomplishment. And if I start feeling good about myself, I stop doing things. And so anytime there's going to be a shift from one energy type to another energy type, there's going to be a period of inefficiency. So you've got to just be prepared for that. And you've got to still stick through it. Because why, you may ask? And let's look at this. So like, even though you can achieve, right, and started dieting and focusing on making money, I feel like I can't achieve unless I'm driven by negative feelings. At the same time, it gives me deep sadness. So here's the problem with using a radioactive fuel source, is that it actually makes it hard to make energy without getting burned by the radioactivity. It pollutes as a consequence. And this is what we see time and time and time again. I've done a ton of work in finance, investment banking, and private equity. And I see these people day in and day out. I've sacrificed everything. I've relied on beating myself up to become the best. And I have achieved, but it has cost me my mental health. I am burnt out. I'm sad. I don't feel good about myself. It's so hard for me to get out of bed every single day. It's like I've powered this gigantic city, but boy, is there nuclear fallout everywhere. And so there's a transition period where if you kind of like switch over to a healthy fuel, there's going to be a time where you've got to figure out, okay, how can I keep this city powered? And you've just got to be prepared for the inefficiency. And that's where practically what that looks like is like, okay, what are other things that you can do? Or other reasons for you to act besides your personal benefit, right? So even if we kind of go back to this post, what we'll see is that there's something here that we can change. Not feeling good enough and not being good enough. So I want to be better. And this is where like we encourage people. So like when I work with people like this, what I'll encourage them to do is think about what you care about in life. What do you really value? What's your dharma? And as you align your actions, not just for personal gain, but to try to make the world a better place, to try to, support people that you care about, to try to help people in your profession. No matter what profession you're in, even if you're a programmer, you can still program for the sake of making the world a better place. Right? Am I going to optimize a sales page for a cosmetics company, or can I do some kind of pro bono work, or can I work for a cosmetics company that I believe in? Right? There are all kinds of things that you can do to align stuff with kind of positive intentions. It requires really thinking about your values as opposed to what you should be doing. What do you care about? And as you align with those kinds of things, positive motive, you'll be able to perform the same, because this is what people don't realize, is that it's ultimately like your study habits that are responsible for grades. All of that structure is there. The car is there. It's just you use this dirty fuel to fill up the gas tank. But if you really look at a gas tank in a car, the gas is like a tiny part of the car. Most of the car is not even gas. And so you can replace the fuel, and the rest of the car will still run. All the study habits you have, all the work ethic you have, you can reactivate all of that machinery with a different kind of fuel. Values, dharma, duty. The last thing to think a little bit about when it comes to dirty motivators, and this is really important, is that sometimes we have, just like nuclear power, a nuclear meltdown. So in the same way that negative emotions and low self-esteem can fuel behavior, if we're not careful, it'll lead to a chain reaction where we can't power anything and our entire city will shut down. If the cycle of self-esteem gets so strong and out of control, then nothing works, right? It's like a chain reaction. The safeguards aren't in place. The reaction proceeds. You have a nuclear reactor meltdown. Everyone loses power. There's a ton of toxicity. And that's what you see, even as a psychiatrist, like that's when we get to like suicidality. Because this thing, which in some circumstances fuels so many people to excel, can get out of control, become a vicious cycle, act on itself, increase itself, and then everything comes falling apart, which is exactly why we don't like to use it, right? So be aware of that self-esteem can get out of control. And for many people, it does. So at the end of the day, think a little bit about your dirty motivators. Think a little bit about what low self-esteem does for you. And until you really acknowledge how effective it is, you can't overcome it. Once you acknowledge how effective it is and you start to look for alternatives, you're going to start to see, oh my God, even if there's an alternative, I should be prepared for inefficiency in the transition. And it's because people aren't prepared for that inefficiency. They aren't prepared to realize that building self-esteem will make some aspects of my life harder, because we just talk about it like it's a good thing. Right? We don't think about the costs of good self-esteem. We don't think about the costs of self-worth. We think low self-esteem, bad, high self-esteem, good. But if it were that way, everyone would be walking around with high self-esteem. And once you appreciate the costs, then you can really transition and you know what you're getting into. You know it's going to be inefficient, and then you can go the distance. So self-esteem is kind of tricky. But if you really want to understand how to stop having low self-esteem, how to move towards high self-esteem, you've got to go through these steps. Understand why you have low self-esteem in the first place. Understand that it's a dirty fuel and gets things done. Try to align yourself towards other things besides outcomes. Try to think about what you care or value about in life. But understand that during that transition, you're going to see a drop-off in performance. But if you stick with it, you'll hit the promised land, which is being motivated by the right things, working hard and feeling good about yourself at the beginning of every day. You wake up in the morning and you want to go to work. You want to be productive. And when you go to bed at night, you can feel good about yourself because you've made the world a better place. And you got paid. But getting to that promised land, you got to cross the desert. So good luck. Questions? So Silas, the creator, is saying, good analogies, just a reminder that nuclear energy is some of the safest energy out there. Yeah, this isn't a knock against nuclear energy. Thanks for specifying. Can desire be a value, Gachigasm? I don't think so. So I think of desires and values as discrete things. So this is going to be in our upcoming guide, which comes out on Monday. But a desire by definition, so we're using sort of a yogic definition, but we can explain this. Think about your desires. Where do they come from? So if you desire to play a video game, Where was that desire born? So the yogis in ancient India said that desires come from the sense organs. So I don't want to eat nuggies until I smell nuggies or memories of sensory experiences. But at the end of the day, I can have no desire. People 6,000 years ago, I don't know if they ever desired a chicken nugget because they didn't know it existed. So desires come from the outside and enter into our mind through the sense organs. People 6,000 years ago wanted security. They wanted self-esteem. They wanted confidence, right? So we use the word want, which is kind of correlates with a desire. So a value comes from within and a desire comes from the outside. Sometimes it's tricky because they kind of get tangled. So I can desire enjoyment and connection, and a game may be an avenue to that. But a desire and a value are two different things. Fundamentally, I think of a desire as something that comes from the outside, and a value is something that comes from the inside. Animal Instinct Z is saying, could someone with depression become a therapist? Absolutely. Right? So depression, unless it's debilitating, you can absolutely become a therapist. You can become a medical doctor. You can become a surgeon. You can do all the things that, quote unquote, a normal person can do. Depression doesn't make you abnormal. It just means you have a medical condition. It's like, can someone with allergies become a therapist? Absolutely. You just have to treat the allergies. You just have to treat the depression, right? Get it under control. You'll be fine. That's the nature of illness. Now, could someone with untreated depression become a therapist? Succeed as a therapist? Maybe not. In the same way that if someone has a heart attack, could they be a surgeon? Well, maybe not, right? It's just if someone has been treated after having a heart attack and their ejection fraction is good, can they continue doing surgery? Absolutely. Can a therapist become sick with depression, not be able to work for a couple months, and then get back to normal, get back into treatment, and have years of productive therapy? Absolutely. How to tell if not giving your 100% is from laziness as opposed to using a negative fuel? Great question, the Tesco pizza. Here's what I'll say. What is laziness? All right, let's talk about this, chat. I'm going to be a little bit interactive, then we'll meditate. What is laziness? Right? So people are saying all kinds of crap. So I'll tell you all how I think about laziness. I think about laziness as an umbrella term. It's a term that's used to cover other things. It's not a thing. Right? So you can have, for example, like in the 5-factor personality system, you can have low conscientiousness, but that's not laziness. You can call it a lack of motivation, but then I'd say the same thing. What is a lack of motivation? Where does motivation come from? So there are all kinds. People can call it resistance. So that could be a piece of it. So how do I know if I'm lazy? You're not lazy because that's not a thing. Like you can't, I don't want to do it. Well, like that's a lack of desire or not wanting to do it. There are all kinds of people who don't want to do all kinds of things and they still do them. So then you say, oh yeah, those people aren't lazy. But here's the thing, when you talk to them, how do they overcome their lack of desire? And what we do is that process is such a black box to us, it's so confusing to understand that we just assign one word and we call it lazy. Laziness is not actionable. What do you do about laziness? No one knows because it's not a real thing. Once you break down the components of laziness into their constituent parts, then you get actionable information. I don't feel like going to the party. I'm lazy. And if you talk to that person, you ask them, what would it be like if you did go to the party? Terrible. What would be terrible about it? No one would talk to me. Why would no one talk to you? Because I'm socially bad. I see. So in this case, your laziness is a fear of loneliness. And you don't want to, it's an avoidance of loneliness. That's not lazy, that's an avoidance of loneliness. Right? So this is what we discover anytime we dig into laziness, is that there's something else underneath. That's why we call it an umbrella term. Spitfire 5x5 is saying lazy is a term for lazy thinkers. I completely agree, and I don't blame them because it's become so colloquially accepted. So laziness is just a form of avoidance, not necessarily Mike Moose 123. It can be a source of avoidance. It can be all kinds of other things. So I'll give you all another example. So Namre 1 is saying, what if I just have zero motivation? So this is really interesting. There's no Sanskrit word for motivation. It's not a thing. Motivation is also an umbrella term. Because motivation is just the absence of laziness, right? One is the absence of the other. They're both umbrella terms, not real things. And if you guys really want to dig into all the 1,000 things that go into motivation, that's why we made a guide about it. So for example, when you say, I lack motivation, there's a part of your brain, there's a whole video about this. There's a part of your brain that makes this thing called the action success calculation. So when you look at literally the neuroscience of how motivation emerges, what you realize is it's a highly complex system with all kinds of variables. And one of those variables is the likelihood of success. So this is really interesting. So part of your brain calculates the likelihood of success. If the likelihood of success is high, it'll motivate you. If the likelihood of success is low, it'll not motivate you. It'll make you avoid that behavior. Makes sense, right? We get motivated towards things that we know are possible. So the interesting thing is there's a very interesting effect of this part of our brain. It explains so much of why online dating is a mess. Let me explain this to you. If I feel like I'm a loser and I show up on Tinder and I start looking at people, my mind, let's say I'm busted with depression and social anxiety. I don't feel good about myself. And Tinder gives me 10 people, 5 people who are confident and 5 people who have profiles that are like, yeah, I suck at this stuff. I'm depressed. I'm a little bit scuffed. I struggle with social anxiety. What do? My mind looks at those 5 people who have their, and I say to myself, oh my God, there's no way they would date me. Chances of success with this person are low. So I swipe left. Instead, what I do is find someone who's just as broken as I am. And I say, that person will accept me. Chances of success high. I swipe right. Now what we've got is 2 people with depression who are in a relationship. What does the data say about depression in successive relationships? Having 1 person with depression is hard. Having 2 people with depression is exponentially hard, which means that the relationship starts off with a low likelihood of success. Even though my brain is telling me, hey, here's what we can succeed at. When you ask them, why don't you swipe right on the 5 people that it showed you? I don't think that would work. I'm intimidated by them. Which in turn means that your action success calculation is influenced by your confidence. That literally your motivation is tied to your confidence. Because if you are not confident, your brain will say, this won't work, don't bother. And so everyone is out there looking to, how do I become more motivated? How do I become more productive? How do I overcome being lazy? The real way to fix that, or one way to fix that, is how do you feel about yourself? But if you ask someone who views themselves as lazy, you say, hey, if you want to overcome laziness, we have to understand how you feel about yourself. They can't connect those dots because they don't understand the action success calculation. They don't understand what is underneath the laziness. It's not laziness. It's that your brain is telling you don't bother because it ain't going to work. right? Because if the likelihood of success is higher, you're going to do something. If I tell someone who's lazy, hey, call this number and hit the number 1, and we'll ship $1 million of gold bars to your house. All you got to do is hit 14 keys on the keyboard. We're going to give you $1 million. They'd do it. They had to believe that it would work, right? But if I say, hey, go out and work for 30 years, and then at the end of 30 years, we're going to ship 100 gold bars to your house worth $1 million. I don't know if that's going to work, so I'm not going to do it. Right? So this is what's wild. Motivation is tied to confidence. And we know that, right? When we go out there and we see people who are highly motivated, you go talk to them, those people are fucking confident in themselves. You're like, man, this guy has it all. He's disciplined, he's motivated, he feels good about himself, but this is where we make the mistake. Or she. We assume that the confidence comes from the discipline. Since they are so disciplined and they go to the gym every day, that's why they feel good about themselves. Because they look amazing. And therein lies our problem. We think the discipline comes first instead of the confidence. So we work on the discipline and the productivity instead of working on our own self-esteem. And since the discipline actually comes after the confidence, this is why we're stuck. So this is what we see, which is kind of weird. I love this. So we have this part of coaching called case review. And in case review, coaches come in and they discuss their cases. They say, hey, I've got a client, in an anonymized way. They're struggling with this. I don't know how to help them. We keep on talking about their confidence. They have all these goals. We're 6 weeks in and they haven't made any progress on their goals. I feel like a terrible coach because they're not making any progress. And then we ask them, okay, let's look at that. Let's see if you are making mistakes. What are you doing? Okay, it seems like you're actually doing a good job. 2 weeks later, same coach comes in. I've heard this story literally at least 100 times. Coach comes in and says, hey, my client just somehow got up and did it all. And they're like, and I'm like, do you feel good about yourself? And they're like, no, because I didn't do anything. They did it all on their own. So now I feel like I'm still a waste of space because I couldn't get them to do it. And then 2 weeks later, we just worked on confidence for 6 weeks. 2 weeks later, they're doing all the stuff they're on their own. And we're like, yeah, good job. They're like, wait, but I didn't do anything. Of course you did. And then the more knowledgeable coaches, more experienced coaches, they laugh too because they've been through all of that. And so what we try to do is we don't fix problems for people. We help people fix problems for themselves. And this is what's confusing for people because like they come in and they're like, oh, fix all this stuff for me. And the coach is like, I don't know how to do that. Or they'll fall into a bigger trap, which is okay. Do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Do these 15 things and you will be fixed. That's the worst trap because the client is asking for it, coach gives it. But when I tell you, oh, chat, are y'all unmotivated and lazy and feel unself-esteemed about yourself? Wake up at 8 a.m. every day. Go for a hike. Climb a mountain. Start exercising. Eat healthy. Do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And you will transform your life. Here's the formula for success. Go and do it, and you will be successful. And what do y'all motherfuckers do? I don't feel like it. If y'all caught Group Stream yesterday, y'all will have seen this. And if you really want to understand what coaching is like, watch Group Stream. It's better than actually the interviews that we do. Everyone's trying to be so supportive. I have a problem. I'm looking for answers. What's the solution? Do we give them answers? Were y'all paying attention yesterday? When someone wants answers, what happens when we give them? It doesn't work. When someone is looking for answers, what do? You ask questions. Right on, KNOUTA. You ask questions. And this is what's so confusing. Because we've been taught this conditioning of life is like, do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Go to school. Study for your test. Study for your test. Pass your exams. Get a job. Fall in love. No dating before 18. No dating in college. Now get married at 24. Have babies at 26. Follow the formula. If you follow the formula, you will be happy. This is what everyone tells us. And when we struggle and we turn to someone, we turn to our parents, we're like, hey, I'm unhappy. Study more. Study more, Alok. You will be happy. I'm lonely. Go find date. You will be happy. Go to bar. Meet people. Meet people. Meet people. Meet people. Meet people. You will be happy. Do this. Do this. Do this. Do this. Do this. You'll be happy. You'll be happy. You'll be happy. Doesn't work. Answers. People who are looking for answers and get them. Doesn't work. People who are looking for answers and find them does work. How do you make someone find an answer instead of getting an answer? You ask a question. This is the core of our philosophy. It's the core of the philosophy I learned in India. I went to India with nothing in my life. And I was like, went to India to get my head on straight so I could go back to the US and become successful. I went there looking for answers. Instead, what I got was questions. And what they taught me is look inside yourself. And then I went to med school. Then I became a psychiatrist. And people came to me for answers. And for a little while, I screwed up and started giving them answers. And then I stopped and started giving questions. Because if you want to change, you got to change in here. All the behavior, I don't know how to say this, but the behavior follows the internal thing, right? Like, obviously, you just can't do the behavior. If you look at someone who does the behavior and someone who doesn't do the behavior, what constitutes the difference in behavior? Laziness versus discipline. Where is laziness and discipline? It's in here. The work has to be internal. But how do you discover? Someone's got to ask you questions. They've got to be the right questions. There's a way to do it. You can't just ask 1,000 different questions. Okay? Now, so XCD Nor is saying internal fixing needed. That's the big irony, is the internal fix, you don't need to fix. You just need to understand. Just need to understand. The fixing will happen on its own. And if you want to know why the world is in such a big trouble today, it's because we've been trying to fix things for far too long without understanding them. Right? So Symbiotics is asking a good question. I don't get that stress state of a dirty motivator. Can you explain why? No, I can't. You have to explain why, right? What's different within you? I don't have enough information to explain it. Or do all people use dirty motivators? Absolutely not. But there could be all kinds of reasons, and we don't know. Someone's asking, is there any requirements to become an HG coach? I'd really love to take it on. Not really. So this is what we found. So we've done a ton of data, and what we've really found is that it's not a particular degree or training or like background. We have coaches from all different kinds of backgrounds. And what we tend to find is it's not your background, but what you bring to the table. So we ask our coaches to be authentic, present, and compassionate. And it's the people who can do these three things and learn how to listen and meet clients where they're at that are successful. So our coaches are, I mean, it's also kind of, in a sense, getting harder because I want to say for the last, we probably review 100 applications and take one coach on average. That number may be a little bit off. So we're looking for something special, kind of, but it's not like a degree is what we're looking for. And that's one of the problems I think that we're having in society is we're focusing more on certifications and degrees instead of like understanding. We care more about a piece of paper on a wall instead of what someone actually understands. So My Name's Not a Joke is asking, how do you choose between getting therapy or a coach? The first thing is it's not mutually exclusive. We've got a page on our website about coaching versus therapy. It's not perfect, so there's a lot of debate about what therapy is and isn't. But what we base that on is like basically like regulations. So in order to be licensed to become a therapist, what are the competencies that you need to have? In most parts of the world, the competencies of becoming a therapist do not require understanding how to help someone find happiness. What's required is understanding how to treat someone who's got a mood disorder or treat someone who has an anxiety disorder. So generally speaking, what I kind of think about is on average, therapists will most of what you can, the minimum competence for a therapist has to do with clinical diagnosis and treatment. And there are arguments against that for sure. A lot of therapists do a lot more than that. But when you look at the minimum level of competence, or if someone calls them a therapist, what boxes do they have to check? Nearly all of those boxes are clinical in nature. Right? So as part of my psychiatry training, for example, I spent months taking call on a unit for people with trauma and borderline personality disorder. I did not spend months in an ashram learning about the nature of mind, suffering, and happiness. So if you look at training for therapists, it's pathology oriented. I'm not saying that I didn't learn about happiness, right? So we studied things like Erik Erikson, who talked about the challenges that human beings face at different stages in their life. And so that's not clinical in nature. It's just like, these are human beings. These are the conflicts that they face. And I learned about that, sure. I got lectures on it, but I did not spend 24 hours on call working with people who had Ericksonian crises. I spent 24 hours on call working with people who had PTSD and complex PTSD and borderline personality disorder and deciding whether they needed to be medicated, whether we needed to use restraints, or whether we could meditate our way through a crisis. Now, other therapy training programs may be different. I'm not saying that the emphasis doesn't change, but based on our reading of whether you should do therapy versus coaching, it depends on whether there's a clinical issue or not. And you say, but I don't know if I have a clinical issue, then start with a clinical evaluation. The two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, part of what we see is very common is people who come into coaching will oftentimes go to therapy with good results. People who have been through therapy will come to coaching and have good results because the therapy was able to do so much, but the therapist couldn't help them beyond a particular point. And they come to coaching and they get a lot of value out of coaching because the two are different. We're not saying that some people just go to therapists and they're totally fine from start to finish. And even what I found as a therapist was that one of my supervisors told me, I can't supervise you. I said, why not? She said, you're doing something useful for clients, but it isn't therapy. I was like, weird. And what I was leaning on is like years of meditative training and like that perspective of the mind. I would talk about karma and dharma. All right, so Cushy Bear is saying, I did therapy, then I did coaching. Perfect. The two are not mutually exclusive. So one way to think about it, so we have I was talking to a coach recently, and she was kind of saying like, there's a difference between having a personal trainer to help you run a marathon and a physical therapist to help you recover from an injury and a surgeon who fixes a broken bone. That's the continuum. So where are you on that spectrum? Is your psychological state the equivalent of having a broken bone? Then you absolutely need treatment. Is your psychological state post that? Then physical therapy is still a branch of medicine, right? It's like recovering function. But then the blend between physical therapist and personal trainer gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then at some point, there's no pathology. So if you're just looking to get healthier, you don't go see a physical therapist. But both a physical therapist and a personal trainer will use weight strengthening exercises. Does that make sense? So sometimes you see overlap. The key thing, though, one thing that I do feel very strongly about, a therapist may not be trained or competent or good at what a coach does, but a therapist can do everything a coach does. And some of them are good at it. And also what you see is overlap. So my first exposure to coaching was a conference at the Institute of Coaching. The Institute of Coaching was started by McLean Hospital, the number 1 psychiatric or number 2 psychiatric hospital in the United States. Also a Harvard Medical School teaching affiliate. So there's a lot of overlap. And the founder of the Institute of Coaching was a therapist, or is a therapist, who focused on positive psychology. And then she started to realize, okay, there's like therapy, there's positive psychology, which is kind of under the umbrella of therapy. But the more that we move away from pathology and more towards positive psychology, and then when we completely go beyond the bounds of therapy and clinical treatment, then we enter the realm of coaching. That's her take on it. And so what you'll oftentimes see is that there's a lot of psychiatrists or therapists who will become coaches and go through coach training. Because it's a different skill set. You just learn different things. There's a lot of overlap, but you learn different things. A therapist can ultimately, in theory, do everything that a coach can do, but a coach cannot do everything that a therapist can do. That's another thing to keep in mind. So Rosalind Dale is saying, I'll be able to afford coaching one day. I really hope so. We recognize that accessibility for coaching can be challenging sometimes. That's literally why we have the first session on us promotion right now. So like, thankfully, the community has been kind enough to support the work that we do. And so HG is paying for the first session of coaching for people. So for those of y'all that we can't pay for more than one session, unfortunately. I mean, sometimes we do. So, and we do that when we can. But the first session right now is on us. A couple things to keep in mind. So if y'all are kind of on the fence, I don't know if this is for me or not for me, you're welcome to try it out. But just like other things, we tend to see optimal outcomes start to really be apparent at 8 weeks and are really solid at 12 weeks. So we'll see, let's say 25 to 35% reductions and let's say 20 to 35% reductions in depression and anxiety at 8 weeks, 25 to 45% reductions by 12 weeks. So it takes some time to change. Just like if you work with a personal trainer, one session, you're actually going to feel worse. Hopefully that doesn't happen in coaching. But if you really want to see change, it takes time. So we've done what we can to help people give it a shot. And thankfully the community has supported us on doing that. So first session's on us. Check it out. So Maduk Ding is asking, what are the meditations besides Nadi Shuddhi to vent negative emotions? Any Shuddhi practice will vent negative emotions. Shuddhi means cleansing. So you can do any kind of venting practice. There are also things that, in general, when you slow the rate of exhalation, you'll breathe out a lot of that negative emotion. So some people are asking, like, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and therapist? So it depends on where you are in the world. So there are some like counseling psychologists or something like that don't even get any clinical training. So in some parts of the world, you have divisions like that. I really appreciate, by the way, the feedback that we've gotten from psychiatrists and therapists and psychologists in our community who have helped us. When we'll say, make a generalization, they'll say, hey, by the way, that's a very like US-centric point of view. So we've done our best to try to incorporate all those kinds of things. There's no way to define therapy, though, because different people will define it different ways. And furthermore, the way that a professional organization and an individual therapist may define it as a particular way, but the country that regulates it may not use that definition. So when we what we end up with is what do the laws say, as opposed to a particular opinion. That being said, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist or therapist? In the United States, there are 3 ways to become a therapist. You can become a medical doctor, which involves going to medical school. Medical school makes you a medical doctor. So part of my training involves delivering babies, treating heart attacks, understanding physical stuff. The other way you can become a therapist is by getting a degree, usually a doctoral degree in psychology. So this is either a PsyD or PhD. PhDs tend to be more research oriented. So if you compare medical training to PhD training, I did not write a dissertation to get my doctorate. I worked in a hospital for a couple of years to get my doctorate. Whereas psychologists will oftentimes write dissertations, or even PsyDs will be less research oriented and more clinical oriented. But the key thing is that a PhD or PsyD will learn very little about physical medicine. So they won't learn about heart attacks or how to treat heart attacks or GI problems or things like that. They may get some exposure, but it's not a part of their formal training. The third way is a licensed clinical social worker. So this is usually a master's level degree, which takes about 2 to 3 years to complete, where these are social workers that go through a specifically clinically focused training and they can become a therapist. Each kind of therapist will, out of the gate, be slightly different. So and this is why oftentimes medical doctors are the prescribers. Because when I give someone an SSRI and that causes a physical side effect, because oftentimes the side effects of psychiatric medications are physical, we tend to know. So if you're a psychologist and someone comes in and says, I started this medication, I've been vomiting for the past 2 days. The psychologist is not going to have gone through the clinical training of a GI workup. So a psychologist doesn't know if this is a stomach bug or a medication side effect or cancer or a volvulus or small bowel obstruction. They don't go through the clinical training to be able to differentiate those things. That's why, generally speaking, I think it's a good idea for prescribers to be medical doctors. There are some counter arguments to that. So that's oftentimes why psychiatrists will be prescribers. Just because when a patient comes into my office and has a side effect, it's like, okay, is this cancer or is this a side effect of the medication? I know which questions to ask and how to assess to be able to differentiate those things. So, but once we get out of the gate, the training is a little bit different. This is the kind of interesting thing. It's not like a psychiatrist who takes 8 years. It takes 8 years to become a psychiatrist in the US. It takes 5 to 6 years to become a psychologist with a PhD or PsyD. It takes about 2 to 3 years to become a social worker. If you take a social worker 10 years out, PhD 10 years out, psychiatrist 10 years out, in terms of therapy, it's not clear that any of those is better than the other. So it's not like psychiatrists are better therapists than PhDs, or PhDs are better therapists than psychiatrists. I would even argue that social workers and psychologists almost certainly have far superior psychotherapy training compared to a freshly minted psychiatrist, on average. Some psychiatrists will take issue with that. That's fine. I'm not the arbiter of truth. That's just my opinion. So it gets a little bit complicated. And depending on the country that you're in, it may be a little bit different. I personally think that the one really interesting thing that really needs to be evaluated in terms of mental health treatment is we're starting to appreciate that the mind is not quite as separate from the body as we realized, or as we used to think. So what happened is psychology and therapy became a completely non-physical intervention. But as we're learning more about mind-body connection, brain-gut connection, things like that, unfortunately, I think that we're going to run into a real problem where a lot of what we understand about the mind, the brain, and the gut, for example, like therapists need to get caught up on that. So I'm thinking that we're entering into an area where therapists will need to learn, clinical social workers and psychologists, in order to deliver the best care to patients, need to understand a lot more about the body than they've been trained in. That's what I'm seeing. Because the more that we learn about psychiatry, the more we're realizing it's not just the mind. For what it's worth, I think that medical doctors need to learn a lot more about what therapists and psychologists learn as well. Not even psychiatrists. So I think we need to learn motivation. I think motivational interviewing should be a huge part of medical training. Because it's ridiculous, man. Like, doctors learn so little about behavioral change. And so what we end up doing is throwing medications at stuff. Why do we throw medications at stuff? Because we don't know how to get patients to change their diet. It's hard. So what's easy in a 15-minute appointment is prescribing metformin or a cholesterol medication. What's hard is getting them to change their diet. But we can do it. I mean, like, in the therapy psychiatry field, we get people who are friggin' addicted to heroin to stop. And if we can get someone who's addicted to heroin to stop, we can absolutely, if we put the same energy and effort into getting someone to stop eating something, we'll succeed. We just don't invest that. Okay. What are your thoughts on if you want therapy for general improvement but don't have anything clinically wrong with you? I think that's a great idea. So there was recently an article in the New York Times about how there's been a scope creep in therapy, and probably it's like it's criticizing that. It's written by a psychologist, which is what's interesting, is that a lot of people, therapy is becoming non-clinical, which is fine. This person, it's just there's an ongoing debate about where the line of therapy is. The thing is that I think therapists are going to be the best trained, on average, professionals, because even in terms of coaching, there really isn't like licensing or regulation yet. So the quality control for a coach, like if you go to a life coach, what are you going to get? No one knows. You don't even have to go through any kind of training to call yourself a life coach, right? So we have, for example, our training is, or our certification for coaching is CPD certified. So we have like a third-party accreditation where we had them review and like basically like give us a stamp that, okay, is this like legit? So we've gone through third-party certification processes, but not everyone does that. I think it's a good idea if you have something that you want to work on. I think it's a good idea to find the right therapist who can do that for you. So you probably have to do some research. You can't go to any therapist, but you call them and you say, hey, I don't necessarily think anything is clinically wrong, but I want to work on relationships. I want to work on motivation. I want to work on this. Is this something that you can help me with? Is this something that you specialize in? What percentage of your patients do you help with problems like this? So I would ask them that. And find someone who's like, yeah, a lot of people that I work with are very high functioning and we focus on relationships. Then go see that person. I think it's a great idea. H. Javes is asking, when should you start seeing psychoanalytic therapist instead of CBT? All right. This is such a great question. My meme response was never, but it's not the right response. So here's the thing. I think the two are complementary. So if you're looking for quick outcomes, go see a cognitive behavioral therapist and go through a course of CBT. In 12 to 16 weeks, you'll be better. When you want more than that, if that doesn't work or is insufficient, then by all means, go see an analyst. But I would generally recommend that people start with CBT if you're looking for a particular outcome. If you just want to explore your mind, like if you want to get a boat and sail out into the ocean and you're not looking to find anything or get anything, but just want to see what's out there, then go see an analyst. They're great at that. Like, just explore. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know where you're going to end up, but you're okay with that. And you're excited about exploring the frontiers of your mind. Then I think an analyst is a good idea. If someone, I'm not saying that that's correct. I'm not analytically trained. I started training, dropped out. But based on my understanding, like when patients come to me or family members come to me and they say, hey, should I see an analyst or should I see a cognitive behavioral therapist? I'll ask them, what are you looking for? And that's how I would answer the question. For people who are CBT therapists or analysts in chat, please, please, please weigh in. Whether that's like grossly negligent or what. What if I want to go on a boat cruise? Should I take a CBT therapist or a psychoanalyst with me? Here's what I'd say. If you get stuck on an island, I think it'll be more fun with a psychoanalyst. Because if the two of y'all are there for 4 years and you've got only one person to talk to, an analyst is the best person. So one of my supervisors, this is going to be a trolling statement. With all the Twitch drama that's going on right now, I don't think this is going to actually create drama, but it's a joke. So one of my supervisors, who shall remain unnamed, but is a famous person in the field of psychiatry, once told me that psychoanalysis is something that psychiatrists invented to stay interested with boring people. Devastating criticism, but not entirely untrue. And I think what it speaks to is that psychoanalysis can go very, very deep. Right? So obviously that person has a judgment about the field of psychoanalysis. But we're not saying that that judgment is correct. I just thought it was funny. And for the record, I had supervisors who were analysts and non-analysts. A therapist once told me psychoanalysis is outdated. Is that really true? I would sort of say no, because I think the field of analysis has done a very good job of keeping up with trends. So like that's one thing they do great, is like they're like constantly revisiting and reinterpreting things. So like there have been like analyses of the Me Too movement through a Freudian lens, for example, or a Jungian lens, for example. The other thing about psychoanalysis is I do think that some of the core concepts of humanity have been best described by analysts. So I think like concepts like Jung's shadow, the basic idea of the subconscious and conscious mind is a gift from the psychoanalytic tradition. So I think psychoanalysis sometimes gets a bad name because what happens is the real gems that they uncovered, the rest of the field of psychiatry or psychology just takes and doesn't give them credit. And what we leave them with is all the weird stuff. So there's a really good book. I don't know if it's easily findable on, but if y'all really want a good understanding of analysis and what comes after, I think Basic Freud and Beyond Freud are both excellent books. You should read them together. So this is beautiful. HJ said, I had years of CBT that was immensely helpful at first, but after hitting a wall of deep ingrained stuff, my therapist recommended I go find a psychoanalyst with a focus on the ego. That's why I ask. That's very appropriate to me. So I think that like one thing to remember about working with a therapist is it's not like go get therapy feels like a binary thing. But I've been, for example, a consulting therapist for people who have other therapists. And I think that works really well. Like not all therapists will teach you the same thing. That's also why people say therapy doesn't work for me. I find that hard to believe. I think a therapist didn't work for you, or even 5 therapists didn't work for you. I've had tons of patients come to me and say, therapy has never worked for me. And we've done great work together. That's why they come to me. They're like, you're different, right? You teach about yoga and meditation. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I will do all of the non-therapy parts with you. But in doing so, I'm actually doing therapy with them, right? Because we explore, okay, what's it like? Tell me how all of the other therapists have failed you. Let's process those emotions. And once they process those emotions of how therapy and how they've been let down their entire life, by the way, I'll be like, by the way, has anyone else besides a therapist ever let you down? Oh, interesting. Your parents have let you down. Tell me about that. Oh my God. That sounds awful. Yeah, so like you're saying, healthy gamer GG, I'm not like the other therapists. I actually don't say that. In fact, I'll say the opposite. I'll say, I'm not sure if I can help you. I can try. I'd love to try. And I believe you deserve help. But I am also trained as a therapist. So if you want to work with me, we can. But the other options are like, you can go to an ashram, right? What do you think about that? What would you like to do? Does that make sense? There's almost like a script, if you're a therapist, for how to help people for whom therapy doesn't work for them. Okay. Pirate Hippo is asking, Dr. K, I'm a new social worker and I'd love to train with you. Is Healthy Gamer hiring therapists? We're not hiring therapists, but what we have realized, we regularly get requests for clinical training. So we've done some CMEs before, but stay tuned. We've got some relatively large stuff in the works. Probably won't happen, may not be available for the better part of a year, but we'll be making some announcements hopefully within the next month or two. Okay. An ashram is like a monastery. All right, we're way past time today. Let me just think about meditation. I'm not really feeling in a good headspace to meditate right now. Okay, let's give it a shot anyway. So, what we're going to do is a meditation about when you feel like shitposting. Okay? That's going to be our meditation today. So this meditation is coming from a perspective of the internet is getting really, really toxic. And what happens is that the content on the internet that reaches us is the content that is the most emotionally engaging. Now, emotionally engaging doesn't mean it makes us feel good. So, for example, if you have a very cute cat video, that will rise to the top of the internet because, oh my God, the cat is so cute. The problem is that we also get all kinds of like Karen meltdowns that rise to the top of the internet. And I think what's happening is we're like losing the war against the internet. And why is it a war? It's because the internet is doing all kinds of things to us without our awareness. So what I'd love to do today is do a basic meditation about when you're using the internet, understanding what it does to you, understanding your reactions, and understanding ultimately your responses to the internet. Because what's going on right now is we have a ton of people who are making posts, posting tweets, uploading videos, uploading TikToks and shorts, and it's like triggering everybody else. And when it triggers you, the person who uploaded it actually wins. Because then you comment, right? You engage with it. You upvote it. You downvote it. Whatever. You like it. You make a response. Then there's a response to a response. And there's a response to a response to a response. And then, I don't know if that sounds familiar. Is anything like that going on right now where there's responses to responses to responses to responses? And each thing that happens, people are getting more emotionally engaged. And we're reacting to it more and more and more and more and more. So I'm not saying that, I am kind of saying that's bad. Actually, now that I think about it, I am passing a judgment there. Let's call it what it is. Maybe I should correct that in the future. But I don't think the real sin is in what's happening. The real sin is in our failure to understand what's happening and being controlled by it. The real sin is the reflexiveness. So what I'd love to do today is teach y'all a meditation to not be reflexive. So this meditation is going to be a little bit different. So if you're watching this later, or even right now, you can either pause or take a few seconds to like open up another tab. And we're going to take 30 seconds to find something to react to. So if you have a political leaning, go open up some kind of social media that is of the opposite side. If you have a particular view on something, go find something else. If you like a particular content creator, go to someone that they're beefing with. This is step number 1. And now I want you to just absorb it, but do so with awareness. Scroll through, click on something. And as you're clicking on it, I want you to notice your reaction. Watch it. Notice your reaction. And now what I want y'all to really pay attention to is when you watch this, people are saying, I'm absorbing poison. You're not absorbing poison. You want to react to it. So close your eyes. Notice the thoughts. I need to teach this person how it is. This person is so toxic. I need to put them in their place. I'm going to troll this person. This person believes this. They're such a noob. I'm going to demolish them with an argument on the internet. They have no idea justice is coming for them. How can people be this way? Maybe you're having thoughts. All people are, all of this group of people is bad. All of the stands of this community. Oh my God, I can't stand people from this political party. How can people with such few brain cells exist? And as you notice those thoughts, pay attention to what you feel in your body. That desire to go to the keyboard and start that's what you want to do, right? Oh my God. I had a window open. It's going insane. Notice that. Where is that feeling in your body? So this is the interesting thing. Emotions have localization in space. They have localization in your body. And now notice that what you are trying to do is fix something in the outside world. You're going to change someone's behavior. You're going to put them in their place. You're going to change their mind. You're going to make the world a better place if you act, if you type, if you put them in their place, if you troll them. And it may be subtle. It may not be so potent. It may be something as simple as, I need to tell people and explain to them because they don't understand. I'm doing it for a good reason, for justice. I need to stand up and support the people who are suffering and the underprivileged. I need to make the world a better place. But now appreciate for a moment that all of those things are actually thoughts and feelings. Your mind may tell you that acting from this thought or feeling will make the world a better place. But now notice, in the past, when you've listened to this feeling, what has happened? Is you own someone in an argument on the internet. What do they do the next day? And notice how squirrely your mind is. Says, yeah, they may not have learned, but everyone who's listening to our Twitter conversation, I changed those minds. And your mind will point to all kinds of things that justifies your reaction. Notice how much you don't want to take it away. Because what's Dr. K doing? He's going to tell you not to do it. But we don't want to not to do it. We want to do it. We need to do it. Got to do it. He's going to trick us. We're not going to get tricked. I am making a difference. I am making the world a better place. The world does need me. Here's all the evidence. So breathe in. Notice where that thing is. Try to relax that part of your body. If it's your chest, you can kind of bring your shoulder blades together and then relax. If it's your neck, you can kind of stretch a little bit. You can always breathe into the space. And let that feeling go. Notice how much you don't want to. And even the feeling of clinging will arise. And notice that feeling of clinging. It may be somewhere else. You don't want to let it go. You want to hang on to it. And breathe it out. Let it go. Let go your desire to hold on. And if you don't want to let that go, let go of your desire to not let go. And as you look for each of those meta layers, find it in your body, and you'll notice something really interesting. It starts to dwindle. And now sit where you are. Sit in your breath. Exist within your body for a moment in time. Free of the swirling storm of the internet. It's pixels on a screen. It's all it is. And you get so disturbed by points of light arranged on an electronic device that are manifestations of the thoughts of another human being. And someone else out there is thinking something. And because they are thinking something, you are surrendering your peace to them. Time to take it back. And now, as you start to attain peace, your mind will once again rebel. And the what-abouts start. But should I be apathetic to the suffering of others? We don't want to lay down and let the evil people win. We must rise up against injustice. Notice all those thoughts come back. And now ask yourself one question. If I truly care about making the world a better place, what is the best launch point to do so? Is it a place of serenity, tranquility, calmness? Is the mind that you're experiencing now, or the thoughts and ideas and resolutions it generates, will these be better than the reactive mind, the reflexive mind, the jebaited mind? And now notice that the whole internet is advocating for justice and putting everyone else on the internet in their place. Everyone is operating from the reflexive mind, the jebaited mind. And what has happened? Is there global peace and harmony as everyone advocates for justice? As everyone points out the stupidity of others, the logical fallacies, and the superiority of my own view? Of course not. So now the mind will ask, okay, so what should I do? And notice that too. Do nothing. Do not give the mind an answer. Do nothing. Just sit. Watch as it rebels. Stay within your tranquility. And as you prepare to come back, I will give you one bit for the mind, which is that the more you learn to do nothing, the more change you will create in the world. The more that you learn to not react, the more impact you will have. And as you finish the meditation practice, observe this principle in your life. So flow state 962, the classic reverse psychology triple bluff. Quadruple bluff, quintuple bluff. You can bluff your way all the way to the moon. That's the nature of the mind. The mind will always find something to react to itself with because it is hungry. It'll debate you into engagement and action. So as drama happens, your mind is like, do not let the drama stand. Let us fight for justice, my friend. Rise up and fight for justice. And as you fight for justice, the drama enhances. And they fight for justice, and you fight for justice. There may be a winner. We're not saying that you shouldn't advocate for the right things. But the place that you should advocate from should not be what you've been debated into by someone else. When you advocate from sthir, stillness. Advocate from tranquility. Because if you want to go the distance, you need to be tranquil. Lisan Susis is saying, I feel like I need to watch the VOD. Welcome, my friend. We're actually on our way out. My apologies for that. I'm not sure what the VOD is going to be good. Good stuff today, don't get me wrong. But it's, like it usually is, a little bit of a wild ride. Mexican is asking, isn't that a paradox, though? Absolutely. That's what the whole Zen tradition is about. It's what koans are about. Right? So these koans are like, how can you grasp? I'm trying to think about what's like a good koan. So people will say like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Like, so that's like a Zen koan. People will be like this. No, but the whole point of a clap is it requires two. So there's like, it's all about paradox because the mind always looks for solutions. But knowing and logic are two different things. This is the big discovery and emphasis of the Zen tradition. That knowing is one thing. Justifying, logic, and explaining are something entirely different. And you can never use logic to bridge the gap to knowing. You can never read erotica, discuss erotica, and watch pornography so much that you will lose your virginity. You can never read books. You can read as many romance novels as you want to. You will never know love until you fall into it. What a terrible challenge to give Twitch chat. Epic fail on my part. Watch me. Y'all will win. So, for those of you that are like, I will prove you wrong, Dr. K, what is happening? You want to troll me? You want to shitpost? I said something, there was a reaction, and you're falling into it. And you will win. You will prove me wrong. And all you will do is have wasted your time. Oh my God. He just taught us a meditation technique to avoid it. And then he debated us into it. Who should watch the VOD now? But actually, you have debated me, because now look how I pointed out to you. Oh, now Dr. K has established dominance. You've fallen into my trap card. I am the winner. I'm playing 5D chess, and we're both losing. I fell into the same trap. I established dominance. Oh, you think you can win? I win. It's a stupid game. That's what the Zen tradition will say. Because we can keep going back and forth. And what comes of it? Who does it help? Okay, who are we rating? If you guys really want to do a good, if we want to pick a good person, we should pick the person that will allow you to practice the meditation technique the best. So this is the one time where I would say, we don't have to raid a small streamer. We want to raid someone who will evoke a reaction. Okay? We're going to go there. We're going to notice our judgment, and we're not going to give into it. Okay? I'm seeing Hassan as the number one person. No. Chat, seriously, do not troll me here, okay? Don't go in and start shit posting Hassan's chat. That will literally, like, you're like, he told us not to do it, we're going to do it. No, man, come on. Go there and try to be non-judgmental. Notice your reactions. Even if you have a judgment, don't give in to it. Don't react to it. Right? And recognize that everyone's just a human being. Everyone's doing the best that they can in the way that they know how. Does that mean that they need some feedback from time to time? Sure. But who are we to judge? Okay? I hope this does not get interpreted as like any, I don't know. Don't judge.